Swinburne University of Technology.
Lovely to be with you. I want to add my acknowledgement to country to John's acknowledgement, and for any of our first Australians here tonight. I just also want to take a moment with that acknowledgement to thank two people, Paul Briggs of the Yorta Yorta people, for his, first of all to Paul, who taught me something about the value of silence from their culture, and also Stephanie Armstrong, who's a Gamilaroi woman, who taught me something about the responsibility we have once we have knowledge. And both of those things to me are questions for our own culture. So I just want to take that opportunity to acknowledge my own learning of this amazing culture that we have in Australia. Transparency, what a great topic. I'm really thrilled to be here. And as John said, I've got quite a few hats, so my freedom tonight is I'm just going to tell you what I think, and none of it belongs with anyone except myself. I was struck by the fact that this was going to be a calm and informed sharing of views, and I was wondering if there might be a riot or something, but you're all looking pretty peaceful so far, so I take it that we're in a listening mode rather than a challenging mode to begin with. My perspectives come, as John said, from being part of the sector for nearly 30 years, and some of my elders I want to acknowledge are Trudy and Michael Liftman and Helen too. There's been a long journey, if you like, in the work that I've been doing where I've gathered some of these perceptions, and I'm talking about the history as something that's in the topic. You know, the world is changing, have we? So the few things I want to offer you tonight are really observations that I think are from the inside. As Gina said, I'm from the inside. We've had the global and the outside, and none of it really has any logical collection together, because I think we need a couple of days to get that logic and stream. So I'll just throw in some of my comments and hopefully they'll be of value to you. I started in the sector in 1988, and this was a time when there were only 4 grant-making membership organisations in the world. And since then we've got thousands in 2013, and I think that says something about what is important to me, is that we understand our own history and where we are right now, that it is not a stable, static situation that we're all looking at. We're actually moving through a time of incredible change and dynamism. We started off as a baby crawling, where we actually found each other and spoke to each other, and Michael, you remember we tried sharing information. We've learned to stand up and walk and created some language, and I don't think we're yet mature. I think we're sort of rebellious teenagers looking for a place, looking for a definition, turning up bits that we don't like and waiting to see what happens next. So the question, are we there yet? I think the answer is no, but be patient. Let's wait and see. We've still got some more building to do. Annual reports were rare when I started. They were a novelty and an optional extra to promote ourselves. Rarely did we promote the people where the dollars landed. We spent a lot of time with our own power and really not even wanting to recognise it. And Michael, I remember your first statement to me when I joined the sector was, well, now you've moved from being a poacher to a gamekeeper. And that was because I'd come from the grant seeking to the grant making. And at the time, I think we understood that we held power that we hadn't quite recognised or were even prepared to acknowledge. And jokes like, you know, people laugh at all my jokes even when they're not funny because we're giving money, or people who give money have never had a bad lunch or a genuine compliment. We'd laugh at that but then quietly feel quite uncomfortable about it. We were slow to take up technology because business was always booming. Nobody minds if you haven't got a website because they always find you anyway. And as for sorting information, well, that was, why would we do that? However, the first time I got into it when I was working for the Reichstein Foundation was when I realised that the board was telling me that we should or shouldn't fund this or that because we've already funded them. or because we haven't funded them and we should give them money. And I'm thinking, how do they know? How does anybody know? So I set about, and we had the Stegley Foundation, the Myer Foundation and Helen Macpherson Smith, and we talked about a common language. Why don't we start classifying? Why don't we start talking about the target groups, where the money's going, how big the grants are? And what we realised was we had this clunky technology and no listening for extra resources. So we did what we could. I remember doing a sort of a cut and paste and actually put together our funding history so I could say to the trustees, actually we have funded them, and I'd look it up and say it was that date. But it was purely a kind of a tool I needed within my work. And once we started talking with each other as foundations and trusts, we realised we were actually speaking a different language sometimes. And our boards were not keen to invest in money. To invest money in the work of transparency. So I think we've made huge steps since those early days, and we're not yet at a stage of maturity where we can use both accountability and transparency as our tools. But I think we're on the way, and I love the work that Jean has been doing. I think it's fantastic to be cutting into it the way you have, and I hope we keep going with it until it's in a beautiful, deep, rich, shared, sophisticated set of data. And as I said, I think that will take years, but nevertheless we've got started. Apart from the history, the thing I want to comment on is the need for a common language and the difficulties about that. I've just finished a book, which I think I'll hold up, and this is the first time it's seen the light of day today. But oh, thank you. Thank you. And in that I talk about the fact that if we're going to be effective grant makers, we have to be practical, we have to be creative, and we have to be philosophically clear about what we're doing. And we also have to be willing to learn. If we're going to do that, we come to the work with a whole lot of different creativity and different philosophies. And I think that's a bit of a challenge, that we don't all think the same. And that's the beauty of the sector. We're all different, but what does it mean when we all get together and try and speak to each other about what we are doing? And the example I want to use to show you this is, if we have a classification system, Somebody's Daughter Theatre Company is a project that we funded back in the day, and we still fund at Portland House now. It's been going for 30 years. If we're going to classify this using some of the data headings that Gina has, is it law and justice because they're women in prison? Is it community service and rehabilitation because we're helping them make a better life when they come out? Is it arts? Is it education? Is it advocacy and giving women prisoners a voice? And I think we could stand 10 foundations all in a row and they would all pick a different description of what that work is. And I'll just flick through these gorgeous photos because I can. This is Somebody's Daughter. And this was, I did a presentation on how the arts address disadvantage, and that was when I started to realise that, you know, what does the data mean if we all boil down to our lowest common denominator? Having said that though, this is a book that's been commissioned by the Australian Communities Foundation, and some of that is addressed in here, that in fact we need to start thinking as a sector, and the opportunities that are offered are there. I also personally love the fact that working for investment, high-level investment company, mainly men, they love graphs, they love data, and what I've been able to do is line all that information up and talk about the sixth form of investment and have graphs like Bloomberg has that says this is how big the granting is for rural, or this is the amount of money we've put into education, and the whole dialogue is there in deep and rich detail. It just isn't shared, and that's our next step. But in seeing how well that data analysis has worked within Portland House Foundation, what I think, and I have said this before, that rapid change for the betterment of society will happen when men in suits with hearts are in charge. And I think selling philanthropy within a corporate environment requires that we have the transparency. It requires that we have data that can be analysed and that we motivate people in order to want to know more, to want to use that information. And questions like, is this giving making a difference? Can we tell people yes or no? Who's benefiting? Can we tell people that? Or even more crucial question, is this money doing any damage? And those questions can only be answered when we've got the data sets that we need. So I've got one more set of comments to make about what are the incentives for people who are donors to move out of the lack of exchange. What are we going to do about that? And I've already talked about the need for resources to do it. We've moved into a time where we are no longer a private club with random acts of generosity and good hunches behind our giving, but we still need to keep using that incentive to say, what is it that's going to make us want to share more? I don't think hectoring or criticising people is going to work. I think the really critical piece about giving that I've learned across many different environments is that it doesn't matter whether you're giving money, whether you're a trustee, a staff member, everyone starts giving for their own private, very personal reasons, and we have to respect whatever that reason is and build it as part of a continuum, build into their motivations and their understandings of what they're doing in a way that helps them move along the continuum. It doesn't say, well, you're doing it the wrong way or you should be doing this. That really puts people back underground in terms of giving. And I'm quite convinced that that's the case because I've seen it happen. So whether it's tax deductions or personal tragedy or a general interest in seeing society be better or a wish for redemption, whatever it might be, I don't think motivation should be questioned. I think our challenge is to say, how much are we giving people to think about why they're giving and to be drawn into the world of philanthropy in a way that's curious and informed, and that's where the transparency is the incentive. The other thing I think is really critical, and Sarah might present more on this, is that the key reason we're doing all this is the destination for the money. And I think a lot of the not-for-profits who come to us for money are the most powerful influences in why we should be transparent, why we should be providing data about what we're doing. Because in the end, if our money's not landing well and we don't have informed and valuable partnerships with the grant seekers, we're just churning and there's money there but it's not doing anything. And I'm again very clear that the number of not-for-profits who step up and say, we want your money and we're going to be frank and fearless about this, this is the best way to give it to us, and help with the transparency issues, help with the value of information and educate grant makers. And I think that's happening. It's better than it was, better than what we used to do, but you know, we've still got a way to go. Now the last thing, I think I'm out of time, am I? I wanted to quote my dear friend John Spearings, who runs the Reichstein Foundation. John and I went to uni together 100 years ago, and he's now running the Reichstein Foundation. And the wonderful thing about Reichstein is that they have transparency explicitly named as one of the values according to which they operate. And so I rang John and I said, why have you got transparency? And he sent this back, so I thought I might just share it. His two reasons were to demystify philanthropy and help create a more healthy power relationship between donors and grantees, and to ensure that taxpayers who are part funding the philanthropic act know what is happening in their name. And he then says, and I love this, there is a mystique about wealth in Australia, about how it is acquired and how it is used. In a society built on egalitarian mythologies, we often don't acknowledge that inequality is at the core of our economic and social relations. Philanthropy both exposes and masks that myth. Transparency is essential to move philanthropy from a discretionary act of kindness to a social contract between the wealthy and the rest of society. We will allow you to accumulate wealth provided we know you put it to good use. Philanthropy can only act with moral force if the gift is transparent and seen to be so, that is given freely and not in return for favours or to advance self-interest. The more we are open about the source of wealth, about the nature of giving, about our motives and purposes, the more we empower recipients. So that's from me. Thank you.
This has been a Swinburne production.